Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Microsoft Project 2010 Live Web Radio. Ask questions and get answers from Microsoft Project expert. Our expert today is Mr. B. Sai Prasad, Senior Manager, Learning and Development, Cognizant Technology Solutions India Private Limited. Mr. Sai would be taking up the questions related to Microsoft Project 2010 in this session. So let's quickly start and take up the questions now. I would request Mr. Sai to please read out the questions and answer them so that all the users may listen to your commendable insights. Over to you, Mr. Sai.
Yeah, thank you. Hello participants, I welcome you all for the live web radio where you ask questions and I give you the answers for it. So please be free to post your questions on the questions tab on your GoToMeeting. So at the end of each of those questions we will quickly look at the Q&A and if the question is not answered or if other participants are having questions, we will take it. So let me take the first question I have got from one of the participants. How do you export data from Microsoft Project to Excel? This is a question from Vikas. Okay, so let's take this question first before I get into the other points. Okay, so the version which we are now looking at is Project 2010, and I hope the question is related to Project 2010 only. Okay, so currently you are now looking at a plan that has been prepared in 2010 where I have a set of activities and with dependencies and resources. So let's say if you want to export this data to a spreadsheet, right? So the first is you need to make a choice in what data you want to export from Microsoft Excel to Microsoft Project to Excel. To do the export, you just need to select File, and you have an option where you can just say Save. Okay, so you can just say Save Project as a file, and you can just tell what is the format of the file which you want to export. Here it is Microsoft Excel. So let me select that, and you need to give a folder where you need to save it. So let me say this is a sample, is the name of the Excel workbook, and I'll save it. This will open up the project export wizard. So this is a 5-step process where you need to select what fields in Microsoft Project needs to be exported. So let's say next. You have been given two options here, whether you want to export the data based on a template or you want to choose what data you want to export. So I'll say selected data, and when you say selected data, you have a choice to choose what fields you want to export. You can either say I want to create a new map, which means that you need to select the fields what you want to export, or you can also say I want to use an existing map. When I say use existing map, you are given a step where you can select what are one of the predefined maps available. Before I choose the predefined maps, let's first create a new map to see what map is all about. On my next step, you need to choose what are the fields that needs to be exported. So participants, please hold on. There is a network issue. Okay, so I hope you're able to see my screens. Thank you. Fine. So here it is in this step where you need to select what are from which table are these fields coming from. As if you have attended one of my sessions, you would know that the data in an MVP file is stored in the task, resource, and assignments table. So I'm just selecting tasks here, and you can choose what data you want to export. You also know that the data, you can either select the fields what you want to export, or you can also say I want to export the data based on a table which is there in MS Project. So I can ideally say based on table, let's say entry, and I will say OK, which means these are all the fields that are there on my entry table, which you see on the background. So you can just remove the data which you don't need, and the final step, I will say finish. Yeah, now the data gets exported to a spreadsheet. Now let's look at how it looks like. Okay, good. So now you're able to see the data got exported, but it might not be a real export. The reason is the structuring is lost generally, and you can also see it is not a date, it's just a text. So you can, even if you format these two columns by date time, the date start and finish date will not get converted into the real dates. So I hope this answers your question, Vikas, in terms of how to export the data to Excel. Now let's take the next question. How can we achieve a non-working day as a working day for a few team members in a project based in calendars? Okay, so the question is about resources, if I'm correct. Okay, so how do we have working time and non-working time for resources? So let's take this question again. Let me go back to my project. So, okay, so in Microsoft Project 2010, right, so the data what you enter in resources can be much better seen in a view called resource sheet, for which just go to the view ribbon and you hit the resource sheet. On my resource sheet, you can see about 5 resources being displayed. So let's take an offshore resource, or I will just try to provide a new resource name here. Let's say Sai. Okay, so by default, as you know, this resource, right, is based out of a calendar. So currently, when you hit the change working time, you can see that this resource is based on a calendar called a standard. What I mean by a standard calendar is the working time is from morning 8 to 12, 1 to 5. So you can ideally configure the base calendar, that is a standard calendar. So you can just go to the project ribbon and you hit the change working time, where you can say at a group level or at a category level, you can ideally say for a standard calendar, the working time is 8 to 12, 1 to 5. For example, if I say any resource who is based on standard calendar, their working time should not be 8 to 12, 1 to 5. It should be 8 to 12, 1 to 6. Okay. How do you do the change? As you can see, the working time is based on default work week. So I just go to the work weeks tab, I click on default, where you have can configure the default working time. Let me hit the details, and I will select Monday to Friday because these are the working days for that calendar. I'll choose a third radio button where I can say it is from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. Okay, so which means that any resource is going to be based on the standard calendar, their working time would be from 9 to 12, 1 to 6. So now let's say I have two resources, Sai and Prem. Okay, so both these resources are working as per the standard calendar. That's what you see in the base calendar option called standard. But you might want to say that the resource Sai, if you look at this working time, on Saturday is ideally non-working because that is what is configured in standard. But if you want to make it as a working day, right, you just go to the work weeks again, where I can override the work weeks defined at a parent level. So here I can just go there and I say for Saturday, it is a working time where the working time, let's say it is from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m. And I can even say it is 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. So you are free to provide the working time at the resource level. So now you would be able to observe for Monday to Friday, it says it is based on the default work week of standard. But if I select Saturday, you're able to see it is based on the default work week of the calendar Sai because I have overridden it. So if you want to set holidays or non-working days for this resource, go to the exceptions of this resource calendar and just choose which day you want to make it as a holiday. For example, if I want to make 16th of November as a holiday, I just make sure that that cell is selected, and on the exceptions name, just give the reason for that holiday. For example, it's a festival, and the moment I press enter, project assumes that that particular day should be made as a non-working day. So if you want to have a pattern associated with this exception, click on details where you are free to choose whether it is a working day or a non-working day, or you want to have a pattern associated with respect to that particular exceptions. Okay, I hope this answers the next question in terms of how to set calendars and how to customize it at a resource level. That's good. Now let's take the next question. How do you use resource substitute? Do we need server for this? Yes, you need server for it if you want to substitute one resource with another resource. This is a question from Raghavendran. Yes. How do we map? There's a next question. How do we map two tasks that need to happen parallelly in Microsoft project? Okay. So I hope this question is about how do we have two parallel activities in Microsoft project, right? So let's take this example. Let's say if I'm having an activity like preparing a document, and let's say this activity is going to take 5 days to complete. And I have another activity called reviewing a document, which also takes 3 days to complete. So, sorry, it also takes 3 days. Okay. So currently, only after preparing the review can start. So I'm just going to say, between these two tasks, let me link it. So you can see there is a finished start dependency between prepare and review. It might happen that when the review starts, you also want to start doing a feasibility study. Okay. So let me have a study activity. So by default, when you say the study activity should happen parallelly with my review, which means when my review starts, my study should also start simultaneously. So first step is I will set a dependency between my study and my review, which means for study the predecessor is 7. Okay. So by default, project assumes only after review your study can start because it assumes it is a finish to start dependency. Whereas in this case, you want these two tasks to be done simultaneously, which means it should not be finish to start. It should be a start to start dependency. So let me double click my study and I will say on my predecessors tab, it is dependent on my review, but it is not a finish to start dependency, but instead it is a start to start dependency, which means when my review starts, my study activity will also start simultaneously. Now let's say okay. Now you are able to see my study and review are happening simultaneously. So the benefit you have is tomorrow if my prepared document duration is getting revised from 5 days to 6 days, you can see both my review and study will get automatically pushed. So I hope this is the question what we had. Okay, so thank you. So now let's move on to the next question. How do we schedule tasks default by hour than by days? Okay, that was a good one. Currently, if you look at Microsoft project, you are able to see by default when I enter duration like 5. You can see it always assumes that it is 5 days. But you want it as 5 hours by default, which means the default unit should be hours. So you just go to the file and go to the options. Okay. So when you go to the options, there is a schedule tab option available. Okay. On the schedule tab, you just find out a section called scheduling options, where it says duration by default is entered in days, work by default is entered in hours. Here I can just change it to, let's say, hours, and let me save this. Now let me just type in a task name, let's say, and if I just go to the duration and I say 5, project it will assume that it is as 5 hours. But you can always override it. You can also explicitly say it is 5 days. But if you just give a number in the duration, it will assume it as 5 hours or 5 days. Okay, so this answers your question. Okay. When we open PWA project in Microsoft project, the default project 1 is also started. Is there any way to stop it? Okay. I don't have a project server connected here, so I may not be able to demonstrate it properly. But I would recommend that you I'll just go to the options to find out what it is. Okay, so you say a default project gets automatically created. Just hold on. Okay, so I don't see any option as such, no, that will disable or stop a new project being created. Okay, maybe let me give a try. Maybe you can just drop me a note after this program so that I can get back to you on how this can be done, Dinesh. Okay. The next question is, how do we enter overtime during updating a project? How do I see it? How do I see its effect either in earned value page or in my resource profile graph? This is a question from Habi Kalyan. Okay, so how do I enter overtime is what this question is. Okay, so let's take an activity to explain this. For example, let's talk about this prepare document. Okay, so the prepare document currently is a 6 days activity, and I'm just going to assign a resource, let's say Sai. So currently this 6 days activity is completed in 48 hours. So it assumes that 8 hours work every day. So you might want to have a overtime with respect to that particular activity. So when you want to record the actuals for this particular task, the first step is you just need to change the table to the tracking table. Okay. So the moment you do it, you are able to see that it has the actual start date and the finish date. Now let's say this activity is 50% complete. Okay. And you are able to see the total actual effort is around 24 hours. So your requirement is you want to enter your actual overtime. Okay. So there are two ways of entering your actual overtime. You can enter it either at a task level using your tracking table, or you can also look at the assignment data through which you can record your overtime. But here, if I just want to enter my overtime, I can just insert a column called actual overtime work. Okay. So when you say actual overtime work, you are trying to say out of 24 hours, how much hours are spent by overtime. So you can just put it as, let's say, 4 hours. So as you can see, this value will not be editable because it is being accumulated at a task level. So I will just change my view to the resource usage. So you are able to find this resource is assigned to prepare document, and you can see towards your right, you can see what is the work estimated on those days. So I'm adding my actual work. Okay, so let me hide all the other resources. So I'm just having my actual work, and I can also add my overtime work here. So through this, you are at a day level, that is at a day level, you can ideally tell how much is actual, how much is remaining, how much is overtime. So you can say that 2 hours is overtime. Okay. So when you say 2 hours is overtime, the total effort spent on that day increases to 10 hours. Okay. So this is ideally the approach which you need to follow for entering your actual overtime work. So just change your view to resource usage and just add a row here called actual overtime work so that at a day level you can enter the actual overtime. Now coming back to the next part of your question, how do I see this effect on the overall? The first effect you will ideally see is when you try to enter overtime, which means work is getting done faster. So you can see that the actual duration of this activity would have got reduced. So let me go back to my Gantt chart. You can see earlier the duration was different. You can see now the duration is becoming, so the percentage completed earlier was around 50%. Now it got changed. The reason is the effect is because you have tried to provide overtime. Naturally, the work is going to be done faster in this particular case. So you can also see the 2 hours is getting accumulated here. Okay. And how do I see that in my resource page? Okay, so I will just change my view to resource graph. Okay, so let's talk about that resource here. Okay. Just hold on, I'll just customizing it. Okay, so this is the over allocated work. I will say show that as a bar. So let me find out where it is. I hope you're able to find on those days where you have entered overtime, you are able to see the bar is automatically shown on your screens. Okay. So as you can see, you might want to make use of the resource graph to find out and customize it to find where you have entered your overtime. Okay. Okay, now let's take the next question. When I assign multiple resources to an activity, each activity can have a different calendar. How does Microsoft project handle work time here? Yeah, see, when you try to have a resource or a calendar at a task level, naturally that calendar is going to be used for scheduling that activity. So let me go to my entry table and I'll just create a new plan. Okay. So by default, as you know that all activities in Microsoft Project, by default it will be scheduled as per your project calendar. So the project calendar is what you set in the project information. So all my activities by default will work as per standard, which is 8 to 5. Okay. Now let me put down an example here. So I'll just have a sample activity, let's say T1. Okay, and I'm just going to make it auto scheduled. And I'll have T2 and I'll have it as auto scheduled. So let's say these two activities are interconnected with each other with 5 days and 5 days. For the second activity, you can just try to understand which calendar is being used by making use of the task inspector. So you can just 1 minute. Yeah, you can just click on inspect and choose the inspect task option. Oops, okay, sorry, I didn't expect this to happen. Okay. Okay, I just reopen this plan. Oops. Sorry guys, that was project 2013. So okay, so let's try it. Okay, so I think it has something to do with my installation. Okay, but anyway, that's fine. So if you have an activity, let me have an activity here, let's say T1, and this activity has been scheduled for, let's say, 5 days. Okay, so by default, the start date and the finish date of this particular activity will be as per your project calendar. Okay, so when I say project calendar, as you can see in my project information, the project calendar currently is been set to standard. So I will just go to the change calendar and I will say that this particular activity, it starts on 6th, right, 6/27. Okay, so I'm just going to say 6/27, it starts. Okay, so I'm just going to make 30 as a working day here. So I'll just go to the exceptions and I will say 30th is a working day. and I'll just go to the details and it'll say it is a working day for it. Now closely observe the start and finish date of this particular activity. You would now be able to see this activity would have got completed ahead of time, which means by default the project calendar is being used for doing it. But at a task level, let's take another task now, let's say T2, and this activity is also being done in 5 days time. So I can always override it. So I can always double click this particular task. I can go to the advanced tab of this task where I can say this task should not be using the standard calendar. Rather, it should be using, let's say, a 24-hour calendar. Okay, so I'll say OK. Now you can see that the 5 days of effort, which is 5 into 24 hours, can be completed in just 3 days. Okay, so as you can see, based on which calendar you are now looking at, accordingly the start date and the finish date of an activity is going to be scheduled. Okay, how do I enter the actual work done for a recurring activity? So it's the same process, Nitya. So you just need to go to the tracking table. Okay, so I'll just first add a recurring activity before I do that. So let me insert recurring task. Let's say we have a status meeting, and let's say this is happening every day, and it starts and it ends after 5 occurrences. I'll say okay. Now you're able to see there are 5 meetings. From one starts on Wednesday and finally completes on Monday. So if you want to record it, you just change the view to that is the table to tracking. Okay, and you just start recording your actuals. Okay, you just start recording your actuals. So you can say your status meeting for 1 got completed. So go to the task ribbon and say it is 100% complete. Maybe let's say task 2, that is status meeting 2, is also complete, but it was not completed on 28th, rather 29th. So you can always make the adjustments here, okay, whenever you try to do it. But remember, you cannot update the actual start and the actual finish at a parent level. The reason is recurring activity is all about it's all about an activity that reoccurs again and again over a period of time. So it is only the lowest level activities that can be tracked. So naturally, based on the data what you're providing at the leaf level, the data gets automatically rolled up at the actual start and actual finish at a status meeting. So I hope this answers your question. What does R bar D mean in resource assignment box? Okay, so he is trying to talk about this option. When you try to assign a resource, I'll just change my view to Gantt chart and table to entry table. So let's say if I want to assign a resource, there are multiple ways to do it, either through this, or you can just go to the resource tab, click on assign resources. You are able to find there is an R bar D column. R bar D stands for request or demand. This is something connected with the resource substitution wizard, which was asked by one of the participants. So remember, only if you have a server setup, naturally when you are using a desktop version of Microsoft Project, what happens is the copy of the global.mpt, that is a template file stored in your local machine, is getting copied to create a plan. But when you are connected to a project server, the template that is there in the server is going to be used. So the template will provide you certain custom fields through which you can ideally tell like a skill set, what is the experience you ideally need. Just as a small demonstration, you can see my substitute resource is disabled here. But I can just tell you where it comes into picture. You go to the resource sheet. By default, what happens is when you have your plan created from the project server, for each resource, you have a custom fields. Currently, the custom field is left empty here. But when you download the template from the server, project server, the custom fields will have parameter field names like skill set, location, what is their other information, line of business, things like that. So naturally, you can provide your values here, what you need. So based on the custom field values, what you're providing here, the substitute resources will try to find a matching resources more at an organization level, and it will recommend you which resource you want in your project. Okay. So coming back to the question what we had, R bar D stands for request or demand. So naturally, when you are trying to assign a resource to a particular activity, naturally this needs to be getting updated in the project server. So here you have an option whether you want to say it's a request or a demand type of resource. Okay, how do you export MPP to HTML file? Okay, since I need to deploy an HTML report daily under a server, how do I do that? This was a question from Divesh Kumar. Divesh, in project 2010, right, the answer is no. You cannot export your project plans to HTML in project 2010 because that feature has been removed in 2010. But if you are using project 2007, okay, you can very well do it. As you can see, when you do a save as, there is only an option. You can see there is an option only to save it in these formats. You can save it as XML. Maybe if you are using XML there, you can try to create a style sheet, XSL style sheet, where you can parse this XML to display it in the format you want. Okay, or you can export it to a workbook. Okay, and you can do it. A second option is if the purpose is if you want the user to just read it. Okay, I would recommend that you save it as a PDF. Okay, because anyway PDF can be understood by most of the browsers, so you can create a PDF and do this. And if since you have told that you want to export it to a Tomcat server, I don't think Tomcat will work for these two options what I'm just highlighting. That is sync with task list or save to SharePoint. So if you have a SharePoint server connected, naturally you can synchronize all these activities to a SharePoint where people can look at it and even update it. So I don't think these options will work for you. So you can just export it to XML and parse it or export it to a PDF. How do I do automatic leveling? What is the purpose of splitting, and where can I see its effect? Can you answer this with an example? Okay, so this is a question from Abhi Kalyan. I'll just go back to my Gantt chart. I'm just going to remove some of the resource activity so that I can just take it. Okay, so in my plan, as you can see, I have a few activities where I have overallocation. So you can see that feasibility and prepare SRS are assigned to the same resource called offshore business analyst. So the question is, how do I do automatic leveling? Okay, so what I mean by automatic leveling is all about you need assistance from Microsoft Project to choose which of these two tasks can be delayed. Okay, so the first is we want to look at the critical parts of this project before we try out the automatic leveling. So I'll do a right click on my Gantt chart and I say show or hide. I just select critical task. So my critical task will be automatically highlighted in red, which means the non-critical activity will have some slack available, right? So I'm just going to insert a column where I can see the total slack of that activity. So you can see the feasibility is having a 2 days of slack, whereas the remaining activities are having a slack of 0. Now, let me save this file, and now let's try out the automatic leveling. So the first option which we are going to learn is go to the resource ribbon, where you ideally need to configure what is the criteria based on which you want to do automatic leveling. So I'll go to the level resources, leveling options, where you have a criteria that you need to configure in the third step. So if you look at the third step, it says leveling order can be either ID only, standard, or priority, standard. Let me choose ID only here. When you say ID only, Microsoft Project will look at those two parallel tasks, that is row 2 and row 3, and it will look at the ID numbers. The task that is having an higher ID will always be delayed, which means prepare SRS will be delayed in this case, which means that your review will also be pushed and the last activity will also be pushed by some X number of days. So if you use ID only, it might happen that it might affect your project finish date, because it might happen your critical path comes later in your plan and your non-critical activities are at the beginning of your project. So let's choose ID only, and I will say level all. The reason why you see a skip here is because of the last activity, but let me say skip. Now you are able to find between feasibility and prepare SRS. The prepare SRS is getting delayed, correct? The reason is I have selected it as ID only. So when you say this is being delayed, you ideally want to know what field is getting updated in this case. The field that is getting updated in this case is called as leveling delay. So there are many ways to look at leveling delay, but the simplest way is insert a column where you can say leveling delay. Now you can see The third activity, prepare SRS, is getting delayed by 3 E-days to avoid that overlap between feasibility. Okay. So this is the first option which you ideally need to learn. The second option which you need to look at for doing the leveling, before that I will do an undo. Okay. Now the second option is I just go to the leveling options again. I would recommend that don't use ID only now, rather let's say standard. When I say standard, between those two parallel activities, it will look at which activity is having a greater total slack. So feasibility is having 2 days, whereas prepare SRS is having 0. So feasibility will be delayed rather than prepare SRS. So let's say standard, and I will do a level all. You can see my feasibility is getting pushed because I have selected a standard. The third option is, though feasibility falls on the non-critical path, you might have a customer deadline, and the customer might say, I want this activity to be finished by 6/30/2012, which means though it is having a total slack, you might want to have that as a high priority. So you just double click this activity and you go to the advanced tab or to the general tab, where you can change the priority value of this particular task. By default, all tasks will have a priority of 500, which means you can assume it is medium priority. I will just change the priority value here to 1000. 1000 indicates that this is an activity that cannot be moved because you are adding an activity that is priority 1000. Let's say OK, and I will do leveling options. I will select priority comma standard here, and I will do a level all. It says project cannot do leveling for this, and you will see nothing would have happened in this case, and the prepare SRS is getting delayed. The reason is, though you have selected priority comma standard, priority of feasibility is 1000, whereas priority of prepare SRS is 500. So naturally priority is going to be used as a criteria for delaying that particular task. Okay, so the second part of his question is, I'll just do an undo, and I will just revert it to 500. Okay. So if you look at your feasibility activity, right, so you can see that it has been assigned to 2 resources, architect and the offshore business analyst. So both these resources are starting on the same date and completing on the same date currently. So it might happen that you don't want to delay the task, rather you want to delay only the resource who is getting affected here, who is offshore business analyst. For which we just go to the resource leveling options. I select standard, and I can say leveling can adjust the individual assignments on a task, which means it is only the resource who gets over allocated, his assignment alone will be delayed. So I will do a level all. Now you are able to find that the task is being split now, right? So you can see the architect is working on Friday and Saturday, whereas the offshore guy is working on Monday and Tuesday. So effectively the task is being split into 2 pieces. So people generally go for this option, that is leveling can adjust individual assignments, if the activity is having multiple resources and you can have each resource at different point in time to complete that particular work. Good, so I hope this answers your question. What is the concept of baselining in a project? This is a question from Chidambaram Narayan. Okay, just visualize, baselining is all about an approved version of your plan. Okay. So if you look at my current plan here, right, so you have a start date, finish date, duration, and work. But as you start executing the project, the work, the duration, the start, finish, all these data will ideally change. But you need to have something that was being promised to the customer, and that is what we mean by baseline. So to understand how baselining works, the first step is you need to understand what is the table you are now looking on your screen. The view you are now looking at is called as Gantt chart, and the table within this view is the entry table. Remember, the entry table will only have your estimated start date and finish date of your activities in the project. So I'm just going to change the table from entry table to the baseline table first. I'll go to the more and I will select baseline and I will say apply. You can see the current plan is not being baseline, which means this plan is not being shared to the customer and it is not yet been approved. For example, let's say the customer has approved this data, which means you need to have a version of a data of a plan that has been approved by the customer. So to do it, you just don't need to copy the columns from the entry table to the baseline table. Rather, you just need to go to the project option where you have a set baseline and select the set baseline option here. So when you select set baseline here, as you can see, set baselining is more at a project level. So a lot of times I come across questions from participants that what is the best view or best table to do the baseline? Remember, baselining is nothing to do with what data you see on your screen, because baselining is all about baselining the entire project, what you see. So when you do the entire project, naturally for a plan, you will have only one baseline at any point in time, correct? But if you look at Microsoft project, there are 11 baselines you can have. Though you see 11 baselines, only one is active, the remaining 10 are inactive baselines. What I mean by inactive is, as you start rebaselining your project, you might want to take a copy of your baseline somewhere else. So those copies are preserved in baseline 1 to baseline 10. So let's choose baseline, and I'm going to baseline the entire project, and I will say OK. Now you would have seen that on your screen, the baseline fields are getting updated automatically, right? So now what happens is, when I go back to my entry table, right, and I just start revising my estimates from, let's say, from 2 days to 3 days, and let me show you my baseline data also. You can see that the slippages is happening now because of I've revised my estimate for some of my activities. You are able to much clearly see on my right hand side how your current estimates are different from what has been approved by your customer. So this is the purpose of rebaselining it. If a set of tasks is scheduled on the weekend, how do we ask calendar for it? Okay. Okay. So if an activity, let's say we have a server maintenance, and let's say the server maintenance is going to be done only during weekend, and let's say this activity is a 2-day activity. Currently, as you can see, this activity is being scheduled. I'll say 2 days. This activity is currently scheduled on Wednesday and Thursday because it goes by the project calendar. But you want to tell that this activity can be done only during a weekend. So the first step is you need to override the calendar used at a task level. So just go to the project ribbon and create your own version of calendar. So click on change working time, and you can create a new calendar, let's say weekend calendar. So you're free to choose what name you want here. And I will create a new calendar and say OK. By default, any new calendar you create, it will assume Monday to Friday is a working day, Saturday and Sunday are holidays. But I just want to swap this. So I'll go to the work weeks, and I will say Monday to Friday is a non-working day, and Saturday and Sunday are working days. So I will say it is from 9 to, I'm just making it simple, I'll just say 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So when you say there is a weekend calendar, you can see Monday to Friday is a holiday, and Saturday and Sunday are only working days for weekend calendar. But you can see that this activity start and finish would not have changed, because by default an activity will be using the calendar which you have in your project calendar dialog. So if you want to override it, just double click this activity, go to the advanced tab, and just say the calendar to be used for this activity is task calendar, which means that this activity will not happen on Wednesday, Thursday, but it will now happen on a Saturday and a Sunday. Okay, so I hope this solves your requirement. Okay, how can I update using quantities rather than percentage? Okay, Abhi Kalyan again. Can you please tell me what do you mean by quantity? I hope you are trying to more measure by output than by the percentage complete. So tracking table, as you can see, there is you have provision only to record your percentage complete, which is your duration completion. But you have another column here called physical percentage complete. But I just want to tell you that physical percentage complete, when you update it, it will not try to update the remaining columns here. So the physical percentage complete is more used only as a measurement to for earned value calculation. So don't expect that based on your percentage complete, the other columns are getting calculated. For example, I can say conduct workshop is 50% complete, and you can have still the physical percentage complete as 0. Or I can go to another activity and say physical percentage complete is 100. So you can see the remaining fields are not getting updated. So as you can see, Microsoft Project does not give a direct way by which you can try to record your physical completion for an activity. Is there any way in MPP to keep the duration start or it's fixed enough so that when we try to add it, okay? So your question is, how do I keep the duration fixed? That was a good one. I'll just go back to my entry table here. So let's take an example that we have a task like you need to do a testing, okay? Let's say the testing activity is a 5-day activity. So by default, if you can see, when you try to add multiple resources, I will try to assign the first resource. And as you assign more resources to a particular activity, right? Just hold on. Yeah, I will just try to have it as 40 hours and let me choose the resource. When you want, as you assign more resources to a particular activity, its requirement is the duration should be fixed or the start and finish should not change. For which you just double click that particular activity. You can see that on your advanced tab there is a task type drop down. It can have one of the 3 values: fixed duration, fixed units, fixed work. I recommend just have it as a fixed duration. When you say fixed duration, the duration of that particular activity will always be fixed in this case, okay? So which means, let me try to just say okay, and I'll just try to assign another resource. You can see as I assign more resource to a particular activity, you can see the duration is kept fixed, whereas the total effort will ideally change. But sometimes it may happen that the other resource who's working on this activity may not be available on Monday. So for example, if I'm trying to choose, let's say, Sai, okay. So naturally, you might come across scenarios where the finish date might also change. For example, if you don't want the finish date to ideally change for this particular task, just double click this activity, go to the advanced tab. On your constraint tag, just say this activity cannot finish later than this particular date, okay. So which means whatever happens, this activity should finish by this date. I will just say it should finish by, I'll just copy this date and I'll just paste it in the constraint date. Okay, so which means that for this particular activity, for this particular task, if I just increase my duration, okay, so let's say to 6 days also, you will be able to see it's only the start days that will get affected, but the finish date will not be changed. So I recommend that before you try to incorporate this requirement, right, before you add constraints, I would recommend ask yourself whether this constraint is very much required. The reason is because it will make your schedule more static than dynamic, okay. So this is something you just need to watch for. Okay, so let's look at the next question. How do I assign 2 tasks to a single resource for the same duration with time sharing? Task A, task B should do in parallel, and I need to assign a resource 10% on task A and 90% on task B. Okay, fine. So let's remove this activity and let's have 2 tasks, let's say T1 and T2, and let's say the first activity is 1 day. It's let's say it's a 2-day activity. It's 2 days. So by default, when you want to say the resource, let's take the example of Sai here, okay? So, okay. So now you are able to find that the resource Sai is working on both T1 and T2, but when you look at the details of that resource T1, you can see resource Sai is working on this activity for 100%. So you just want him to work 10% on it. So I just reduce it to 10%. Okay, so you can see the units is 10%, which means that he's going to spend less time on that activity, so the duration will ideally increase. The 16 hours of job can be completed now in 20 days. So let's take the next activity. It is also 16 hours, 2 days, but the resource needs to complete or needs to spend 90% of its available time on this activity. Now you're able to see the work can be now completed in 2.22 days. So just click on details or just double click the activity and go to the resource tab, through which also you can provide the assignment units. So I hope this answers your question. Yes, so I'm just searching for the question window. Just hold on. So Mohini, are you there? Can you show me the question window? I just closed it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I got it. Fine. So that was a question from Nageshwar Reddy. The next question is from Ramesh. Is there any scheduling limit in a project? I heard project 2010 supports only till 2049. Please confirm. Yes, you're true. You cannot go beyond to 2049 year. You are right. Is there any Agile or Scrum templates available for project 2010? As such, Microsoft does not provide any of those templates, but you might want to check some of their blogs. It might have links from those contributors on how to do it. The next question is from Abhi Kalyan. When I assign various resources to an activity, while each resource is having a different calendar or working time, then how does this affect your working time? If none of them work during the same time on a given activity, how do you do it? So your question is, if I have more than one resource to an activity, each one of them having their own calendars, actually they will not work on a common time. How do you take care of this challenge? Okay, so I'll just go back to my resource sheet. Let's say that Sai is working as per standard and Prem is working as per the night shift calendar. Okay, so naturally, when I try to go back to my Gantt chart and let me remove these two tasks, and let's say we have T1, let's say this is a 5-day activity. So when you try to assign these two resources to this activity, let's say Sai and Prem, you can see that the total effort, right, for this particular activity is currently around 80 hours and 10 days. Now let's look at how this is getting calculated. So I'm going to the view ribbon where I can just change, I'll just do a split. I'll click on the details. On the bottom, I'm just going to change it to task usage. You can find for T1, though I have both these resources working for 40 hours, you can see much closer that on Wednesday, Sai is working during from morning to evening, whereas Prem is working during night shift, which means he spends only 1 hour midnight to work on this. So as you can see, there's no common working time between these two. One obvious solution is create an overlap between these two calendars, between standard and night shift. If you think that is not feasible, just double click that particular activity and just override it. Just choose the calendar what you want to choose, and just choose that the resources needs to work as per the standard calendar. And when you say OK, Microsoft Project says that there is no common timing between these two. So you can ideally see that both these resources are now working as per your standard calendar. Okay, so naturally at the task level you need to override it. So if the resource is working during different working time, Microsoft Project will not find a common working, will not automatically find a common working time. You need to force it by making use of the task calendars. So I'll take a couple of questions, and if there are any more questions not answered, please write to me. Okay, so I'll just share you my contact here. Can we create a multilingual task in Microsoft Project 2010? Dinesh, I have not tried that one. Maybe I don't know it will, because when you try to install Microsoft Project, it will ask you what is the language which you are going to use. Okay, so it is purely dependent on what is the control panel settings you are having. So naturally it should, because Microsoft Project is being used across the countries outside also. Let's take the last question. Two resources are assigned to an activity and they are supposed to work in tandem. So in 8 hours, they actually do 16 hours of work. However, if they have to work on serial mode, where one has to be completed as a part of the activities, and in which case it is necessary to have 2 activities, or is it possible to use a single activity? So remember, if a same activity, if the 2 resources are going to work in tandem, better assign both of them on the same activity. But if it is more sequential, just try to have it as 2 different activities so that there is some amount of traceability there. Okay. So I think this is what the questions I really had. Okay. So I'm just directly going to the last one. So thank you guys, and thanks for your questions. I hope most of your questions got answered. So if you have any more questions, or if you have requirements for any training, you can just write to me. My ID is sai@saiuniverse.com. So Mohini, I have done with my presentations. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Sai. I think our attendees got the questions answered today. So I would also request the attendees, if you have more of your queries, you can write to Sai, and we even have some more sessions coming up, so they can ask their questions there. I would also like to thank all of the participants for their support in making this Q&A session a success. The recording of the session would be available on techgeek.com on the webinar page by evening. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.